For Our Soil's Sake is brought to you by Holistic Management Canada. My hope is to feed our souls by having meaningful conversations with farmers, producers, and experts in agriculture to get a greater understanding of management practices that mitigate climate change, improve water quality, build soil health, and enhance habitat and biodiversity on agricultural landscapes. To give those of us who live in the city a better understanding of how what we consume directly affects our health and the health of the land. My name is Bronwyn Green, and I'll be your host. So for our soil's sake, let's dig right in. Okay, so thank you for tuning into the show. Joining us today, we have Michelle Schramm and Troy Stozek from Fresh Roots Farm. Fresh Roots Farm is a 360-acre farm near Cartwright, Manitoba. Their farm consists of a herd of around 45 cows and their calves, and 175 beehives that produce raw honey, and a laying hen flock of around 80 to 10 hens. This past summer, their farm was involved in Holistic Management Canada's Accelerator program, and that program sets out to speed up the adoption of regenerative agriculture practices here in Manitoba. So Michelle and Troy are here today to share their experience in the program, as well as share a little bit about their farm. So welcome, Michelle and Troy. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, nice to be here.
Hi. Did you both want to start off by just saying a little bit about yourselves or your farm?
Yeah, sure. So we're over in Cartwright, Manitoba, which is, I guess, southwestern-ish Manitoba. It's a smaller community of about a few hundred people. We are located on as you said, about 360 acres. We have a diversified farm operation where we have cattle and bees and chickens. Michelle grew up here, I guess, on this land, not on this particular property, but this is actually her grandmother's old house that we live in now.
Cool.
And on that home quarter. I'm from Dauphin originally, so I'm an import to this area, and I'm a first generation farmer. So we've been at it for about 10 years.
We have a couple young boys. And so that takes a lot of our time. And we also try to direct market most of what we're producing here to folks in Manitoba.
Awesome. And so, Michelle, you grew up on the farm, or not this farm specifically, but in the area on a farm. Did you always want to farm? Like, did you know you always wanted to farm growing up, or was it?
No, I sure didn't. I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s was when I kind of left this town, in search of better things, which is kind of the general, things are getting better now, but I think at that time there was, BSE, the mad cow was happening, and things didn't look very positive. And so a lot of farm family parents, I think, were kind of pushing their children to go off and go to school and do something different, because things seemed a little bit depressing at that time. And so I didn't really have interest at that time, and I thought I was going to do other things. And lo and behold, with two younger brothers, I'm the eldest, and I ended up back here, I think, to my parents' surprise.
Nice. What were you doing in between that time, if you don't mind sharing what that journey kind of looked like? Where did you go after you left the farm and before you came back?
Yeah, I left at age 17, went to Winnipeg, and worked a little bit before going to the University of Winnipeg for about 5 years and taking international development studies. Which is obviously something that I didn't pursue as a career, but some of those courses led me towards the path of realizing I was really interested in rural communities and livelihoods, and agriculture in particular. That was just something that was close to my heart, and I think it took me about 8 years being away from home to really come to that realization. And yeah, and then of course meeting Troy um, was somebody that sort of had a similar dream, I guess, despite not being from a farm himself, and so we were able to sort of visualize what that might look like for the two of us, and visualize something that was inspired by some farming folks that were doing things a little differently that we were seeing happening sort of in this area of Manitoba.
Cool.
Mhm.
And so what about you, Troy? Did you, when you were in Dauphin, kind of when did this idea or dream of yours start that you wanted to farm?
Right. So yeah, both my parents were teachers. My dad grew up on a farm, so I guess it kind of skipped a generation with them. Yeah. So I moved away to university, much like Michelle, at around age 18, and spent a bunch of years kind of at U of M. Did my undergrad and then up doing grad studies in environmental studies. And my research was kind of focused in agriculture issues. I was actually um, studying the effects of the mad cow disease crisis in Western Canada on prairie farmers, and so got to interact with a lot of cattle producers all throughout the prairie provinces through that research project. And throughout those summers that I was in school, was always finding myself drawn to outdoors stuff, using my hands, going and planting trees in the various boreal forests throughout Canada, finding myself attracted to labor jobs, and also kind of interested in business ventures too. So I ended up starting a kind of a edible landscaping company after I finished school, and was kind of doing research on the side. So I was kind of all over the map, and I guess that's why I found myself interested and drawn toward agriculture. I passionate about food issues, developing localized food economies, that whole idea, but also just kind of attracted to the diversity of tasks that one needs to figure out how to hone in to be a successful farmer.
Right.
So yeah, that's all those things, and coupled with the fact that Michelle and I's worlds collided, and we kind of had this opportunity to pursue this shared dream. It just kind of the stars aligned, and here we are. So
Very cool. Where did you guys start? So you met and found out you guys had a similar dream that you could build together. Where did you guys start from there?
Um,
by just ditching our city jobs and kind of deciding to go traveling for a few months down to South America, we decided to do a trip and just gain some perspective before settling. It's like sinking our teeth into this kind of agricultural career, which we knew would be full on. So we traveled around in South America and volunteered on some farms along that path too, which was kind of part of the intent there, just to kind of gain some perspective on. We're always interested in kind of smallholder farming and smaller scale, more human sized, human scale agriculture, and so we found ourselves on some pretty interesting farms like that down there, and yeah, it was a good transition. We kind of gained some perspective, had some time to figure out if we could actually function together full on in that way, and then when we came home, we were yeah, ready to kind of sink into this thing, and we
And
landed on the farm and in spring, and kind of started a few ventures, I guess, just kind of with nothing much in our pockets, but just
yeah,
some ambition. And
really, despite me growing up on a farm, I didn't have a lot to go on really. So with the privilege of having land to work with here, that was in my family, we started with some farming enterprises that were really low capital investment, which namely were market gardening and raising a bunch of meat chickens, uh, which are both things that we're not doing now because they're a lot of work, but they didn't take a lot of investment, and yeah, that's where we
right.
started.
Okay, that's great. And so, just to give our listeners some idea of how I know you guys, I met Michelle and Troy a couple years ago when I was applying for the Young Agrarian Program, and so I actually applied to apprentice under them on their farm. And so I interviewed with both of them and got to know a little bit about their farm. And so I remember during our interview, I thought you had said that not, and maybe it wasn't your first, but that the honey and the bees were kind of like a big start for you too, in terms of
Mhm.
like gaining some capital and profit for your farm. And so is that right? Or am I kind of mixing it up? Is
Not
that
quite. I mean,
kind of
I guess
started too?
we didn't have access to a lot of land, I guess, and so and we didn't have a whole lot of experience. So the bees really kind of landed on our laps as an accident. We were involved with the Harvest Moon local food initiative, which is a kind of a collective of farmers that's kind of aiming to help the farmers get their feet on direct marketing, or was at the time. And so as part of that, there's a training component. They were getting some funding through Heifer International, which is an international charity. And so farmers within that group were taking turns kind of mentoring newbie farmers in different ventures. And so there was a beekeeper in that group who ended up doing an afternoon seminar with us. And part of that was we could take 2 hives home at the end of it. And so we took these 2 hives home after a afternoon course that we took with Ian Barnett was his name, and kind of just had them on our land, and I just kind of interacted with them all that summer, and found myself drawn to them in just really intrigued with how bees operate. And then at the end of the season, the honey that I was tasting out of that hive was just absolutely incredible, and like nothing I'd ever tasted before.
And you got way more than you
And
thought you would
yeah,
out of 2 hives. Like
for sure.
it was amazing to see what even just 1 hive can produce when it's doing well. So
Totally.
it
And
was exciting. Yeah.
it was exciting, and the uniqueness of it. People I was sharing the honey with were like, "Wow, this is really special honey. It tastes like quite unique, and the texture was really nice." And so we kind of figured out that it had a lot to do with the floral sources that the bees have access to. We live in a area of Manitoba that's very has probably a lot more land allocated to perennial acres than
Marginal.
a lot of areas in Manitoba. So lots of pastures and hayland, so lots of legumes, diversity of forbs, and all kinds of other flowering plants throughout much of the spring, summer, fall. And so, yeah, we kind of just looked at it as an opportunity to expand upon as far as a business, to try to figure out how to get this fantastic honey from these amazing floral sources into more people's pantries, kind of thing. And so over the years, it kind of just I was stung by the bug, I guess, if you want to put it that way, and got kind of obsessed with bees and figuring out how to care for them and develop a business out of it. And the idea was to try to replicate that dipping of my finger into a beehive, which is the luxury that the beekeeper gets to have, is like tasting that fresh honey straight out of the comb. Like, how can I get that experience of like this raw, unadulterated honey into to customers so they can appreciate that wonderful experience? So like we started figuring out how to market raw honey, which is essentially honey that hasn't been heated, it's just been coarse filtered and minimally processed, and getting that into a jar. And so that's been our journey in the bees to try is figuring out how to do that. And it's really allowed, because bees are so, they don't require a land base. So most of our neighbors would love to have our bees on them, so we can expand endlessly without having that intense, expensive capital of land as an overhead for that enterprise. So, and thankfully, there's an incredible proportion of regenerative and holistic management operators in this area. So we are partnering exclusively with landowners who practice regenerative ag in one capacity or another for a honey. So we've really kind of dialed it in and lucked out as far as building that venture. So.
Right, and they're benefiting too by you guys having the bees, or even having like a beehive on their land, because then they're getting the pollinators into their crops and things like
For
that too.
sure.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. And so, I think a lot of people, and like I didn't know this until last year, is like the difference in honey and like the taste. So the commercial, clear kind of yellow honey that you get, just in any store tastes significantly different from your guys' honey. And I've had it and it's absolutely delicious. And so that's kind of like what you were saying, was that's kind of the idea of where they get their pollen from. So it's the different flowers and things, but also is it how you guys, what's it called? Like process the honey after. That's kind of
Hmm.
what contributes to the taste as well.
Yeah, so it's like the nectar sources of the flowers. Like it's kind of like when the bees have access to the kind of diversity they do, like produces a different flavor. And so like our bees, the honey that they produce will be different than somebody else, even on similar types of acres. There's lots of nuance in honey, um, flavors and characteristics and texture. And so the main things that make our honey special are the floral, the flavor that comes through in the honey from the floral sources, but most importantly, the texture that it naturally all honey naturally crystallizes like over time as it cools and given time it granulates and certain floral sources make honey crystallize way more coarsely, which makes it kind of a lot less palatable without processing, so without, like, for instance, creaming or other forms of processing like heating. And so lots of our honey's nectar sources is from legumes, and so legume honey naturally crystallizes quite smoothly, so remains very spreadable and very kind of it's a very desirable texture for putting directly into a jar, and that's kind of so we don't really have to process it as long as the floral sources are right, for that goal.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. What would you say if you guys have a shared favorite thing or if it's separate, you each can each answer differently, but what's your favorite thing about farming?
Um, for me, I would say I get a lot of motivation from um, the excitement of entrepreneurship, and the sense that by doing what we're doing, we're contributing towards a community of local people that are, eating our food, people that don't only just buy our food, but they're personally invested in our practices. They're interested in learning about our day to day life, and they ask us about our kids at our deliveries. That those relationships, even though we really are kind of only doing that about 1 day a month, um, I think the thought that what we're doing is hopefully contributing toward many other people, by providing them food. That gives me a lot of motivation, and therefore I really enjoy doing the kind of marketing, and administrative work, which is largely my role in our business in terms of the
Great.
direct marketing.
That's wonderful. You guys do a great job at direct marketing. Well, just from what I see, and I live in Winnipeg, and I have numerous friends who know about you too. So I was surprised, but happily surprised
That's
that I
great.
have
Oh,
a couple friends
Thank
that
you.
that purchase food from you guys.
that's cool. I'm so glad Michelle is into all that important and hard work because I'm less interested in that way. It makes us a great team. I'm a lot more. What gets me going is being out on the land and really appreciating all of the kind of, I don't know, the awe-inspiring stuff that happens on a day-to-day in amongst the drudgery that is most of the time. Like I'm trying to figure out how to learn to grab onto moments of just beauty, that are out there. I feel so endlessly grateful and privileged for the opportunity to have livestock and interact with animals and to care for them and to go into the bees and just like sometimes just like the pause and like think about the absolute ridiculous kind of miracle that it is to like be in amongst bazillions of bees buzzing around you and just to know that you're part of that system in a very direct way and an essential part of that
Yeah.
system. It's pretty cool and just appreciating just, I don't know, all the little things, and like that I get to that I'm privileged to have an opportunity to do as a farmer. And we need to grab onto that stuff because, as I was saying, like 90% of the rest of the time is chores and drudgery and all other stuff, right? That we have to do, which is enjoyable enough at times. And but also what I like about farming is just the diversity of tasks, and the way we've designed our farm is accordingly is around diversity and different
Changing with the
different
seasons.
enterprises, different
Yeah.
types of livestock that need management at different times. And so as soon as you get kind of bored of one task, you're on to the next one kind of thing. And there's always that end in sight, which I do appreciate. Um, I like that change. So yeah, just the diversity of skill sets and things that are going on is what really attracts me
We
to it.
both, one thing Troy and I both, I think, really enjoy is being our own boss. That's pretty great. I mean, it can sometimes be tough to be self-employed, but it has a lot of perks.
For sure. Yeah.
Right, having to be, like, self-disciplined and
Yeah.
motivate yourself, but then there's a lot of autonomy that comes with being your own boss.
Hmm.
Right.
And also now just with kids, it's with a whole new dynamic and trying to figure out how to like engage with them in this farm context too. It's really fun and challenging at times for sure as well. But it's a whole new dynamic.
Right. And sometimes, like, I've heard it, and I've been on a farm too, and the daily tasks can seem repetitive, and you're moving fence or checking on water, and those things you kinda have to do every day, but when we have all the different enterprises and things that you can work on, it really does mix it up. Cool. What would you say your biggest challenge farming is? And this could be like just an overall challenge that you face every day, or it could be a specific event that happened or something like ecological that's happening on your farm that you're like, this is challenging and we're trying to work through it and not really sure how yet.
Mm. You want to start on that one, or you want me to take a crack at it?
You go for it.
I think like the first thing that comes to mind, and it's like the bane of every farmer's existence, is just like cash flow, having coming up with cash
Yeah.
to meet all the different demands that cash is required for bills, purchase expenditures of all kinds. There's always stuff you can spend money on. So figuring out how to like budget properly, sometimes income streams, the timing of incomes are changing. Thankfully, with our business model, it's a little easier than it once was with direct marketing. We now have like more of like a monthly consistent income because we're doing deliveries once a month, whereas before it was kind of like sell the calves in the fall and all of a sudden you have this huge windfall of money that you have to like parse out throughout the year or whatever it is. And so yeah, cash flow is tricky. I'm sure every other farmer that's listening will be nodding to that.
Well, and then I think the other big element that wasn't as big a deal this year, but is sort of at the forefront of our minds always, is just um, the changing climate and
Mhm.
adapting to
Extreme weather
extreme
patterns.
weather patterns, things that are frankly a little scary. And with a couple years of drought, we made it through that, and I think we're really proud of some of the ways that we did. But it was pretty tough at times, and it was pretty hard on mental health wise. And going forward, we realized that for ourselves, and if there's any chance for the next generations to be farming on this land or at all, yeah, we're gonna have to make some major adaptations. And yeah, so it can be going along with the cash flow, just like when we're working really long days, we're working really hard, a lot of physical labor, a lot of emotional labor. And at the end of the day, when uh, you're still having financial challenges, and oh, by the way, we didn't get rain for 6 weeks. It's kind of makes it feel
It's
like is
vulnerable,
this
yeah.
it makes us feel really vulnerable, like is it all really worth it? And so we've had to question, and it's given us pause, and it's given us reasons to um really seriously look at what we're doing and the way we're doing things.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
How does like holistic management, like I feel like you both have taken some holistic management courses or have some knowledge about it. How has that helped at all with those challenges and planning financially and how to plan for drought? And did that kind of take a play a part in you guys making it through the drought last year? And did you notice that like your farming practices are making a difference in these extreme changes in climate that everybody's
Mhm.
facing?
Yeah, big time for sure. It was really noticeable, and we felt like having, especially after we came through, after every drought ends with the rain, and eventually that did come, and just being when that time did come and that pressure was taken off, we found ourselves in a pretty good space. We found that we made it through way more comfortably than when you're in the middle of it. It's like, holy man, you've seen the grass dry up all around you, and everything is just dying, and there's no end in sight, and then just the rains never seem like they're never going to come. But then you make it through, and you realize that, yeah, our management and the years leading up to it of building soil health and resiliency in our land really did pay off. We found our cattle came through well. We had decent grass reserves. Everything it didn't end up being as bad as we made it up to be in our minds, I guess.
And I mean, I think it can give us perspective. And I don't like doing this as a rule, but I think at times we can kind of look at others around us, neighbors and people in the area. And I mean, both of us have worked at our my family's ranch supply store, and so we hear stories of people coming in. I remember, people coming in July and saying that they're having to feed their cattle already, which is heartbreaking. And I really felt for those folks, but it just made us realize how lucky we were that our systems were allowing us to be able to, it was months later until we had to be in that position. And I think that that is partly due to Troy's, really thoughtful, uh, adaptive management of our grazing lands, we don't have a lot of land, so we have to be really
Yeah,
careful with it.
the motivation has always been to try to do more with less, because that's been our reality with our land base, especially with our cattle. Like from as soon as we started, we knew that that land was gonna be our limiting factor for growth, and so we were highly motivated to try to figure out how to make our land more productive, so that we could, yeah, grow more grass, and therefore more beef per acre than otherwise. And so we've that all that management really did pay off in a big way through those droughts. That intensive, that long rest recovery period that our grasses have had for years and years, it just pays off hugely.
Absolutely. Nice. And so why did you two apply for the Regenerative Accelerator program?
Well, we saw it as a pretty great opportunity, um, to
It's exactly as the name
it,
implies. I mean, just accelerate us. Like it's just we're always overly ambitious with all the projects that we have, and we're trying to figure out what the balance is, especially with our cash flow. Um, and so just to have the opportunity to be able to put some financial resources towards things that have been on our list of things to do for a long time was huge. Um, to be able to just look a little bit outside the bare necessities of what we need financially to keep the balls rolling on our farm towards some things that are going to be a bit more of a long term investment, is was huge. So as well as some of the mentorship stuff, and I think most importantly, some of the land monitoring stuff that we had a chance to be a
mhm.
part of. We've been thinking for years that we've been wanting to get some probes in the soil and get some baseline tests for our pastures and haylands that we manage, just so we can have a starting point for monitoring and something quantitative that we can actually measure over time and refer back to. So that training that went along with that, as well as the sampling and baseline stuff itself, is huge for us.
Awesome. What project did you guys implement with the funds?
Kind of a bunch.
We decided on a few different things, including we were able to purchase some new fencing supplies, like an energizer, some temporary fencing supplies that we really rely on for our grazing. Um, those were things that were more like immediately valuable to us, as well as the purchase of some cover crop seed. Uh, and we also were able to purchase some tree seedlings, about 175 tree seedlings for shelter belts. Um, we, yeah, I mean, we don't have a lot of trees in our land, and it's really important for us. Uh, and it's tricky now without, having a program like PFRA that used to be able to provide those. Now that we have to purchase trees, even though it's something that means a lot to us, it's hard to find the extra cash flow to do something like that. And we did plant some during some of those drought years, and um, not all of them survived. So it's been great to be able to help fill in some of those areas. Um, and we got some watering equipment like a trough and fittings, and some perennial pasture clover seed.
Yeah, so that was kind of half. We did deferred some of our project to next spring, which will be kind of oriented around pasture seeding.
Okay.
So yeah, we're gonna be planting, sowing a bunch of legumes into pasture in the springtime. So that is the plan.
Cool. All sounds great. Um, I kind of wanted to just like diverge from my questions here and get you guys to explain a little bit about your laying hens. And I have spoken with a couple other farmers who do have laying hens that aren't necessarily raised in a conventional way. And I haven't had them speak about it. So I was hoping that you two could just share a little bit of information for our listeners who don't farm and don't know the difference between perhaps the way you guys raise your laying hens and the more conventional method. And so a lot of people who necessarily like, don't agree with eating eggs, it comes from the thought of the chickens being in these cages, hundreds of chickens in these cages, and then producing these not great eggs. And so it's like a fear of some of the consumers that I know at least. And so what's the difference between how you guys raise your hens compared to conventional methods?
Yeah,
In
we
short, sunlight.
yeah, they have access. They're able to be out on the land. So the way that we're raising them is in the summertime. We have a mobile coop that we call the egg mobile. Um, it was an old hay rack that Troy made a few years ago into a little building on wheels that has slats in the floor for the manure to go through. It's something that we move around. So they roost in there at night. We have nesting boxes in there to collect eggs. And we've had on average between 80 and 120 birds in there and they go down through a ramp and are allowed to kind of go into a certain area that's fenced, in our case, with some poultry netting, electrified to protect from predators. They've been either out on our pasture or even this year we mostly had them out on our hayland. So to improve some of the areas that needed more fertility. That's basically one of the things that um, they can provide for our land as well as giving us the eggs. So they get to peck around in that area, and it's pretty cool. They put themselves in at night, and we move that coop along because that's most of where the droppings go. And we move that coop along every couple days, and then we have to move the whole shebang about once every 10 days or so. And it was a great enterprise for our apprentices to kind of take on and take a lot of leadership in. Um,
Right.
and so that's been great. I'll be honest and say I'm not sure we're going to continue on with it.
Okay.
It is just that's a conversation that we're having just because of our lifestyle, and it's not one of our major enterprises. So once our kids get older, I can see us having some more of those enterprises where they can kind of help out with the chores. But yeah,
Right. But it's something that you guys are reviewing right now with your context and your decisions and actions to decide if it's something that kind of fits
for sure,
with
trying
you.
to fit it into that like holistic context for sure.
Mhm. Totally. Cool.
Thankfully, it's
Okay.
one of those enterprises that you can exit from and enter back into quite easily. Like it's not. I don't feel like it's a huge departure. And like
Like the infrastructure that it would take to run, like it's easily
Yeah,
disassemble.
Yeah, we purchase new hens every year. We usually keep them around for a couple of years, but yeah, it's relatively and it can be very efficient on a certain scale. So I would encourage folks to consider it.
Right,
Um,
running those numbers
because
of
of
their
course
land and what scale
quality,
can be affordable.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
and a great quality product that when people try pasture raised eggs from pasture raised hens, they can tell the difference for sure.
Absolutely. Cool. Okay. And so my next question, kind of a long-winded question here, but as Troy was mentioning, as part of the program, we did some monitoring on their land. And so we did that through the ecological outcome verification methodology. And so what we did was we were observing the four main ecosystem processes on each of their pastures, which are the water cycle, the mineral cycle, energy flow, and community dynamic. And so community dynamic is kind of the one that stood out the most of needing of improvement, and whether that is the community dynamic of the landscape, so the ecology in terms of the different plant species or insects, birds, animals, all the way up to the community dynamic of the people living on the land and managing it, so the community around it. If you two were going to talk together or talk with one of your close neighbors about how to improve community dynamic, what would you say?
get with it.
Get with it. Get on board.
No. Oh,
Well, you had a conversation with a neighbor,
yeah.
you know.
We've been finding new paths to inclusivity with some neighbors who are interested in dipping a pinky toe into, who are grain farmers, into the kind of cover crop growing kind of enterprise or possibility. So we, one of our biggest limitations, as I was saying, is land, and so we were growing. We have been growing cover crops on our land, like annual crops for forage production for our cattle's winter needs, feed needs for years and years now, but we're in the final phase of turning everything back into getting everything back into perennials, which has kind of become a new goal. We kind of decided we'd phase out annual cropping on our land for various reasons, and so, but we still need the feed. And perennial feed can be a little bit unreliable, especially on drier years. So, annual production is still something we feel we're going to need to access. So there is an opportunity to work with neighbors to grow annuals for us, and why not have those annuals be the kinds of diverse medleys that we've gotten used to growing on our own, and of which there seems to be more and more funds available for through government programs to incentivize those grain farmers. So we've had some success with a larger community, that being our neighbors, to try to figure out how to collaborate more. And so that's, I think, is very promising as far as the larger that kind of community dynamic.
So what did you say?
What did I say to convince them? Michelle asks.
That's what I was wondering. I was like, how are you doing this? How are you convincing these grain farmers to get on board?
Well, yeah, it's tricky. I think for the
It was
one,
hard.
it is hard.
Yeah.
It's for the fellow we worked with this year. Um, they were already interested and had kind of done some of the initial research themselves. And I think, and after everything was grown and harvested, the just having their experience was similar to mine when I first started growing cover crops, which is that it's fantastically amazing to go and watch that diverse mix of plants growing to get in amongst each other and turning into this ridiculous jungle with virtually no inputs, and just the beauty of it, the life in it. The just This fellow was amazed just how big it got, how diverse it was, and was completely fascinated by it, which was and completely different than the monoculture crops that they were growing otherwise. It's completely, it's a mindset shifter, and it does it on its own terms. And it, like I, the person, the person who got me fired up about cover crops used to kind of remark that he would go out every night and put his cover crops to bed, and that would basically just be the ritual of going out and checking on it and just watching it and looking at it to see how much it grew and what's growing. It just there's so much to look at. There's so many things to stimulate your senses, compared to any other crop that you might, happen across. It's fantastic. It's beautiful. It's the diversity is amazing, and the way it all works together. And then the results. I think we didn't do a good job on kind of soil testing before and after. I do want to start doing that because I think that is one of the ways that we can start selling it to farmers way more. So we've done it somewhat on our land, just seeing the before and after as far as what that diversity of plants are doing to the soil dynamic. So that could be another way to sell it. But yeah, I think it's just people kind of have to be sort of on that, shifting their minds to begin with to make the pitch. Some people are just fundamentally opposed in the same way they're opposed to, having bulrushes in their ditches, that they feel the inclination to go and burn in the fall because it just isn't just so, it's just like some people's mindsets. Your paradigm has to be kind of on the tipping point of changing,
Right.
and a little bit welcoming of such an idea. And thankfully, there's more and more people talking about these concepts, and so more and more people are thinking about them. And as farmers are always look, there's so much groupthink that happens in the agricultural landscape and like coffee shops and beyond. So like the more people that it always takes a leader, and it always takes some people to kind of go against swim upstream. And I think the more people get on board with it, and the more funds that are available and incentives, the easier it becomes.
Absolutely. And also just like you said, just seeing it. Like I feel like once you bring one of those farmers into one of those pastures with that cover crop with all those different species, it's like so beautiful and overwhelming and
Hmm.
sensory overload. It's hard not to think how great it could be. And even though you're not necessarily seeing like the ecological difference in the soil, like you can see the growth and you're like, okay, this is a good thing.
Yeah, and they're gonna get paid. Like the tonnage that came off was impressive, and like the inputs were very minimal. All they had to do was fill up their seeder with my seed, do the seeding, and we did all the harvesting and everything else. So like when they do crunch those numbers, I'm pretty sure they're gonna see that it's pretty attractive on the
Yeah.
financial side of things too. I think we veered way off from the community dynamic question, but that's
No, that was a great answer. That was great.
there's lots. I feel like the community dynamic question is so huge. There's lots, like on the ecosystem level, we've seen lots of improvement on our landscape. There's been lots of changes since we started farming on this land.
Yeah.
A lot of which have been really positive, I think, as far as
Well, you could mention the
like
the Siberian elm seedling
the
invasion
forest, yeah, the forests that were
forest that we
growing on our
have.
land inadvertently, um, and have allowed to grow. I think the land as a way, if we're willing to listen, a way of communicating to us what its needs are.
Mhm.
And the one example, yeah, as Michelle was saying, is like these Siberian elm shelter belts that were planted in the 40s or 50s or whenever it was on our land. Siberian elms, if anybody knows, they're a hardwood tree that's super invasive and really able to spread its seed very well, and if left unchecked, can really become quite a weed. They've invaded some of our pastures in areas that were historically overgrazed, leading up to when we got here, and marginal land, and so they established themselves and kind of established a bit of a forest. And we scratched our heads for many years and consulted with lots of people on how to deal with them, and eventually just ended up deciding to leave them and see what happened. And we've been kind of observing what's been happening. And even and through these dry years, especially, we found everybody talks about how you got to get rid of these trees because they're going to the limiting factor is soil moisture, and they're going to take up available moisture from your perennial plants that your cattle are going to graze, which we just have found to be not true at all. These particular trees have a tap root, so they're getting moisture from really, really deep, and they don't seem to be affecting the grass growth at all. If anything, the shade that they're providing is allowing the grass to thrive way more than it otherwise would have. And so we're seeing more grass growth, we're seeing wind protection, we're seeing
Biological diversity. We're seeing bird
Habitats. Yeah, like
species. Yeah, way more raptor species.
deer. There's all kinds of new dynamics, in that ecosystem that are just really cool to
Native
watch.
pollinators.
Capturing snow, like we captured feet and feet and feet of snow last winter. Like that pasture, like with the amount of moisture it had, which is a very, very sandy piece of land. Like it just had unlimited fuel for most of the summer with that moisture. Anyways, it's been amazing to watch. Aside from the pain in the butt it is to fence through with temporary fencing at times and try to chase a stray calf or cow through that mess is an absolute nightmare. So I think we're going to end up trying to tame it a little bit, but
Yeah.
just an example of just like, yeah, maybe that's exactly what that land needed and it's exactly what it kind of gave itself, and all we
Right.
had to
Maybe
do
it's a
was
future woodlot, even
maybe
partially
the
too.
future would lot, maybe, yeah, maybe it's just, the human had to get out of the way for it to kind of sort itself out. And so the prospect of trying to tame that and fight it, in the conventional ag way, like the endless resources that we could throw at trying to get rid of those trees by chemical or mechanical means would be it's just so unbelievably daunting. But anyways, we're going to step back and just let it happen for now.
Right, and kind of like, what is the point, right? Like, if your guys' context is to have, like, healthy producing grasslands to feed the cattle, like, are the trees stopping that from happening? Or is it like, yeah, a mindset thing that the idea was thought that they're taking away from the grass, but maybe it's not really? And in holistic management, there's that concept of like the coil spring that over like years of years before you guys got there, when the grazing animals were overgrazing it, they were suppressing that forest from happening. But then
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you guys lifted that pressure, now that forest wants to come back. And yeah, how can you guys, like, does that still fit in your context? If it did
Mm-hmm.
become a woodland, could you still manage the way you guys had hoped to?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
The main thing is to remain open to all of those things and to not just get into tunnel vision about what the land ought to look like, because that's the way it always was or whatnot. Like it's about constantly evaluating and reevaluating and reassessing what our goals and all that stuff and fitting it in and what does the land want, balancing it
Mm,
all.
totally. Cool. Great answer. I'm going to shift gears right now because I just want to quickly, before we wrap up, ask Michelle a directed question, kind of. And so, before I'd mentioned, you guys do such a great job with direct marketing, and as Troy was saying, sometimes you're out there and you're so busy in the field. A lot of the farmers are saying the same thing: is that they're just so wrapped up in what's happening in the actual landscape and the process it takes to manage that there is no time to do the direct marketing and kind of sharing your story to the public, which is so important for your farm to be successful. Do you have any like tips or advice for people or farmers who are trying to direct market and using social media? Is there any sort of like tidbit that you could help them with?
I think for ourselves, I was also not making that aspect of our business as much of a priority as it needed to be. I think part of that comes from the idea that as farmers, we need to always be out there on the land. You're not farming unless you're out there
Mm-hmm.
doing the chores, doing that work and being out there. And it was probably honestly having children and being relegated to the house and, having some major surgeries and not being able to physically do that work alongside Troy or on my own like I was used to doing before. And so I think wanting to throw myself into more of that sort of administrative, a lot of it is computer based work. It's I think I had to have a paradigm shift in realizing that I'm still a farmer when I'm doing that work, that it is really important. I saw that when I did put more effort into that side of our business, it did result in the sales that we were hoping for and looking for, and putting some extra effort in making sure that like we're caring for our customers and we're showing them that we value them and we're doing extra things to mix it up and really try and be creative with that side of our business, that that should be valued, and therefore also more recently realizing that to take the time to do that needs to be formally set aside. Might mean for us it meant like we need to get more childcare on a more regular or full-time basis, even during the summer. So there's all kinds of, you can get all kinds of feelings about that. Why aren't your kids alongside you on the farm? Um, that can't and maybe shouldn't always happen, especially at the stage of where we're at with our kids, 2 kids under 5. So, um, you know, I have days of the week that are my days to work on these things. And I really do try to be disciplined in putting those hours aside for that work. It's really easy to get pulled into the other stuff or
Right.
distracted. But I think that that's been really important for me. And then taking time to invest in learning a little, just constantly challenging myself to learn more about marketing and how I can do that better.
Awesome. Yeah,
It's
just
the
putting a
hard work.
priority on it.
It's the hardest work on the farm, is what
Yeah.
Michelle's doing. It really is. Like farming is easy relatively. And it's like I feel like I'm just like kind of a glorified janitor at times. And
Custodian of the farm.
No, I do feel pretty lucky, like, on the -30 days when Troy is often the one that does have to go out there and do that stuff. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to be in here by the warm wood stove doing my work. And, I feel badly, but yeah, it is still important. And so I think we just need in anybody that's doing that kind of work needs to realize that it should be valued, and, um, it can be really fun. But
Right, and then I like how you
everything
said
we're
that it
doing here on the land doesn't, for us, in our context, doesn't really mean much if it doesn't translate into
business, yeah.
sales at the end of the day. We're selling
exactly.
product, we're raising food for people, and so we have a really great relationship with butchers, our processors, for our beef, grass-fed beef, and we do our own processing for honey here, and we really rely on some labor there. Sorry, and yeah, so
Yeah, when we first got going on this, our main goal was to not be a hobby farm and to instead be a viable business. And so part of that journey meant having to orient ourselves toward putting the work into the direct marketing side of it, which we've, as Michelle said, learned is of utmost importance, even though we have virtually no training in marketing, per se. And it's putting that time in and figuring it out has been a huge part of any success we've found.
Right. Yeah, and, like, I like how you said that it's easy to get pulled into the farm, and I think a lot of farmers think that, like, that manual labor is the thing that is, like, valued as a but, like, they both are so essential, and even though you're not doing physical labor, you're doing an enormous amount of labor in a different way that's benefiting the farm. So I like that you phrase it that way, that you still are a farmer, you're still farming, it's just a different area.
mhm.
Cool. Okay. I got a pipeline or pipe dream question for you too. If you had an endless amount of money, resources, and time, what would you change about your farm?
Time would be the best one.
Hmm.
Oh man, above
Yeah,
all else, no. We make decisions about how we manage our time. So ultimately,
and it's money. I mean, feel like it's such a loaded question because I feel like money is such a limiter for so many in so many ways, but it's also having the motivation to make money is also valuable. Um, but I
Yeah.
think, yeah, oh, so tricky. I feel like,
we we're some of our enterprises are at a scale that is tricky that way. So it makes for higher labor and higher time and
yeah,
energy, in proportion to what we're receiving for income. So I don't know, I guess if we were able to be at a position where we could balance that, home and work a little better. It's a constant work on for
Hmm.
us.
Right.
Yeah, we enjoy
Um,
it. I mean, as far as we started with kind of from ground zero, especially on our honey enterprise, and so being able to invest in all the things that would make the labor savings a reality, like there's
Right.
lots of stuff that we can improve upon that way that would save all kinds of time and make just the physicality of that work a lot more tolerable. Also, just staff. It's endlessly challenging to find good staff, and so to be able to pay, really good wages and make it attractive, and have people stick around for longer, and have excellent housing, and to putting adequate money into our house, which has been relegated in so many ways for lots of years, for the farm, putting any extra money into the farm and the business. Um, there's lots of that kind of stuff that we could spend money on. Yeah,
yeah.
maybe a good vacay.
Goals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'd still be here. It would just,
Mhm.
I think we would just be able to, yeah, accelerate, if you will. Our
And then and even though you said that you love the diversity of different tasks, let's just say hypothetically you did have, a healthy stream of income coming in and help, would you have, like, a certain enterprise you would wanna focus on more? Like, would you wanna just do cattle or just do honey, or would you like the diversity and you'd keep doing multiple different things?
Yeah, I love the diversity and like the rhythm of it all, and um, the changing of jobs and tasks throughout the seasons. So I think diversity would remain likely, but yeah, maybe like just I've always imagined land is so it seems like such a pipe dream to access more land just for the just 'cause it's so expensive
Right.
and out of reach. It seems that it sure would be nice to be able to impact more
Yeah.
land, with
Yeah. We could
grazing
grow,
practices and
we could really grow the number of, cattle we're able to raise in
Right.
in that way. That's yeah, one of our limiting factors right now in our cattle enterprise in growing too
yeah,
much.
it's been so fun to watch our land um, improve and just to see those changing dynamics of the ecosystem that is our land, over time. And it sure would be nice to, yeah, witness that on more land, and
Yeah, on a larger scale.
all the extra, labor that would require if we had limited resources, we could figure out a way to get the help for it and all that stuff too, which I know lots of other farmers have done quite well. So
Very
yeah,
cool. So you would keep farming.
I think so. I mean, yeah.
Nice.
Totally. Yeah.
What else are we
So
gonna do, really? Like, I don't know. I feel like I'd get
yeah,
so bored if I didn't have something to do all the time, or like, I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah. I think all out of all of that, like the thing we have to be real about, like, Troy's old. No, I'm just kidding. He's over 40 and I'm not, so I can say that. But
Yeah.
like we do have to be real about like taking care of our bodies and our health.
Yeah,
Like we've just had quite a string of sickness, and it really impacts our ability to do this work and to even just be a part of our community socially and all those things. So I think prioritizing,
self care and
self
like, yeah,
care, sometimes that does require a little bit more, a little bit more
more time and
time and
capacity.
money,
In
unfortunately.
the
But
summer, like when we're racing around, just barely keeping the wheels on the bus with everything happening, even with, you know, 18-hour days or whatever the sun affords us in the middle of summer or
yeah,
whatever self care is like the bottom of the list. I mean, to take an hour or two or whatever to freaking do some yoga and a meditation, like that's unfathomable. Like it's
Mhm.
time. So like, and how insane is that?
Yep.
to you do it in this line of work where it's so essential that we look after our minds and our bodies. If we can't find that time, and like maybe it's on us if we've designed it that way, and it's spiraling out of control that crazily at times, like that's maybe on us and our management. And we definitely have that conversation, but it's at times it just feels like you're trapped in the heat of battle, and it seems almost impossible to not just use every second of the day,
Yeah.
in a quote unquote
Totally.
productive manner.
And I would just want to put a shout out to anybody who's listening that, and I have no qualms about saying this out loud, that like both Troy and I have benefited from therapy, like the online options right now for being able to talk to a mental health, somebody who's
Professionals, yeah.
trained professional, has been really important to the both of us. And yeah, we continue to use those services. And for anybody that's really, a lot of the we've been held back. We've felt held back in the past by not having options, or having the closest option be we drive, an hour and a half just to go to an hour therapy session, and taking that time out of your day. So having so many more options since, actually since COVID, and um, the rural mental health program that is out there that actually offers farmers a number of free sessions. And I don't think a lot of people know about it, but that's one place that people can start to if they don't feel like they have the financial ability to make that happen. But that's
That's
one thing.
awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's something that I think, yeah, people don't discuss and don't talk about, but is
Hmm.
definitely very needed.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not going to be any good to the land and the benefit of the land and our livestock if we're not, looking after ourselves. So we're constantly trying to figure out how to weigh that in, make that have more weight in our community dynamic.
Yeah,
Some all
we're letting the land rest. We need to let ourselves rest, and especially show our kids that we know how
Exactly.
to rest.
Yeah.
right, in that balance.
Hmm.
Very cool. Okay. What would you two say to somebody who has no experience in farming but would like to start? What would your piece of advice be for where they could start?
Hmm. Start with, what do you love doing? What could you see yourself waking up to every morning and being inspired to do? Um,
Find mentors, maybe related to some of those things. We've gained so much ourselves from having great mentors,
Nice.
both in the realms of just regenerative farming, but also direct marketing. A lot of those things sort of are interrelated often. Um,
have a business plan. What is there something that you could see yourself growing or producing that there's a market need for? Do you want to do this for money? Do you want to make a living out of it? That's another important question. And
Setting
then,
goals.
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Setting
Yeah, is it
goals.
a hobby farm or is it gonna be a business?
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I think we really did right is in terms of risk management. It's really important. Our opinion is that some debt is inevitable, and it can be a very beneficial tool. Um, I see a lot of really young people getting into ag, even those that are like multiple generation farmers, and they're just sinking themselves in so much debt. Um, so being a little bit cautious about that, but we worked when we realized that what we wanted to be direct marketing our products to people, to customers locally, and we wanted to do things that way. We slowly built that network. It takes a really long time to build that group of customers. Jumping in all at once when you don't have that network can be really hard. And so we kind of it was hard, and it still is, but it's so much easier now that we have this group of regular customers that comes back, enjoys the quality of our products. So I think that there's a really interesting concept of market first farming that is was thrown out there by actually Chris Newman from Sylvan Aqua Farms down in the States. And I'm really intrigued by that model because it's kind of like actually suggesting that if people want to start farming, instead of buying a piece of land and
Mm-hmm.
going for it right away, it's very intriguing, the idea of build your market, buy product from somebody else, especially
Right.
if you think this is what you want to do, sell it, tell their story, build that market up first, with a relatively low amount of capital investment in infrastructure. And then once you have that market, you can see where it takes you.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to do it with
We don't have to get stuck in just,
buying land, and yeah, this it seems like that's the model, and it's a huge. It holds a lot of people back because land access is so difficult. It's maybe the biggest challenge, and so it's
Yeah.
thinking creatively about how to get involved with yeah the food system and agriculture in ways that are outside of that.
and don't
I
be
think
afraid
that's
to take
such
risks.
an excellent answer because that is how it looks right now from someone not coming from farming is that you have to acquire land, which is almost impossible or
Hmm.
very difficult. And then you have to make sure that land actually produces, and then you have to sell the product. I
Hmm.
love the idea of starting with learning how to market that product without the infrastructure and building that client base. And then you almost work backwards, which that makes so much sense to me.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
That
then
makes so much
community.
sense.
Don't be scared to like figure out what resources are out there. On the same
Yeah.
line of thinking, you don't have to buy a tractor. You don't have to. There's ways to like develop collaborations and share resources, and like I think you can make a million barriers as to why not to start. But like at some point, jump in and figure it out. I mean, there's lots of ways to figure it out, and it doesn't always have to look at that one traditional way.
Take calculated risks.
Yeah.
It's good to do a bit of research and stuff, but if it were up to me, I would take a lot of time making a decision and pulling the trigger. And thankfully, Troy is the kind of person that is a little less risk averse and is just able to be like, let's just do it, let's try it, and maybe that's because he didn't grow up on a farm and he doesn't have that, those barriers baked into his brain. But yeah,
Totally.
it's we've you don't always have successes, but
You just gotta try.
Yeah, and so in some ways, people who don't grow up in farms have way more opportunity to see things a lot differently, which I think is what we really need in agriculture right now,
Right.
just to reimagine what our food systems ought to look like and how we raise food and get it to people.
Totally. Awesome. Great answer. Do you two have anything else you want to add or share that we haven't talked about or I haven't asked you about?
Nope.
I don't think so, except that, yeah, we're just really thankful to have been a part of the Regenerative Accelerator program.
Hmm.
And, it's given us a lot of opportunity. Um, yeah, we're hopefully going to do a little bit more mentorship sessions with our mentor, um, who's somebody that's also doing direct marketing and we look up to as a
Oh,
business
awesome.
person. So, yeah, and just to keep, yeah, monitoring the land and connect with all you great folks.
Nice. I'm excited to get your guys' reports back. We're still waiting on
Mm.
the soil sample information, all that data. So that's why the reports aren't finished. But in terms of just like the observational stuff that we saw in your pastures, it's already looking really great. And I know Troy, me and Dana like joke about how harsh you were with the scoring of everything, that you always wanted to be like scored so much harsher. And even then, it looks really great. So I'm excited for you guys to see that baseline and start working from it.
Mm. Awesome.
We don't want the baseline to be too high, right?
That's right. We got to go.
Yeah, exactly. You need room to move. Okay, so I just want to wrap up the session by sharing some resources with our listeners. So, where can they hear more about you, follow along your journey, purchase items from from your farm? What would be the best way that people could hear more about you?
Yeah, probably just checking us out online at FreshRootsFarmMB.com, as in Fresh Roots Farm Manitoba. And then we're online. We're on Instagram at Fresh Roots Farm MB and on Facebook. And don't do a ton on there, but yeah, we if you sign up to our email list, you can hear all about what we're doing and sending out email newsletters, and that's largely how we communicate with folks.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
To learn more about holistic management, regenerative farming principles, and the farms in Manitoba that are implementing these practices, check out our Instagram and Facebook page or visit our website at holisticmanagement.ca. And make sure to sign up to our newsletter so we can let you know about all the upcoming events and learning opportunities in your area. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future on this podcast, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. For our soil's sake, thanks for listening in, everyone.